It was thrilling to see his sweet eyes, but we wouldn't know for months that he couldn't see us back. Hey, you're listening to The Rare Life. I'm your host, Madeline Cheney, and today I have a solo episode for you. Today I will share the deeply emotional story of Kimball's blindness. It's been a long time coming. This was arguably the biggest blow of a diagnosis to receive and the least expected. And it seems to fit into the theme of diagnoses and interventions quite nicely. I'd like to start out with a little snapshot of where we are now, today. Kimball is deaf-blind, meaning he has both deafness and blindness. He has moderately severe hearing loss with hearing aids, and I talk a lot about that in episode 44, if you want to go back and listen to that one. He uses his vision very functionally now, but it has not always been that way. Dun, dun, dun. So, when I was pregnant with Kimball, we had the unofficial diagnosis of CDPX1, which turned out to be his correct diagnosis. And we were told a lot of different things that he would likely have, things like his unstable cervical spine and nasal stenosis. They could even see that in ultrasound. He had no nose bone, which would affect his airway and his dwarfism, things like that we could see in ultrasound. And we could guess from the very little research that did exist for this very rare condition. It also listed cataracts in the research. And so we knew that was an option, but those are pretty treatable in most cases that these kids have it. And just a little surgery and they are on their way with no lasting effects. And we would later find out that vision loss blindness is actually associated with this syndrome. The researchers just don't know it. We did our own little research in our Facebook group for CDPX1, which is a very small, tight-knit group. And when we were suspecting his vision loss, I asked people on there, and lo and behold, it is a thing. Not all of them, but some of them have that. So we had no warning. None of the professionals had any warning that this could be on the table for him. When Kimball was in the NICU, he had to be sedated because of his cervical spine. They weren't sure if it was stable or not. And so to be safe, they sedated him so that he would not hurt himself by moving around and cause spinal compression at the C1 and C2 level, which could lead to paralysis or death. So they had him sedated for that first week until they could make a cervical collar for him. And in that first week, I think it was on day 5, Justin and I arrived at the hospital and we saw his eyes kind of fluttering because I think they were just lightening up his sedatives. And Justin and I were all excited, like, oh my gosh, did you see that? Like his eyes were fluttering. We might see his eyes today, which I think is something that a lot of parents of typical healthy children don't even think about. That goes along with a lot of people's experience in having babies that have medical complexities or are born super early. Like things like seeing their eyes. We hadn't seen his eyes yet. We didn't know what color his eyes were. And of course, we're really anxious for that connection. You know, that one connection that newborns can really have with you is eye contact. So we're really excited for that. And the NICU nurse was like, oh, you haven't seen his eyes yet? They're blue. And we're like, oh. So it turned out that he had been awake before we'd gotten there and she'd seen his eyes first. And that was I was a little bitter about that. But, you know, I was excited. And later on that day, he did open his eyes and he was awake for the first time. And we saw his beautiful blue eyes. But we wouldn't know for months that he couldn't see us back. And they checked his eyes for cataracts. He didn't have any. So we checked vision off the list. And we went on and took him home from the NICU a few weeks later, and I noticed that he wasn't looking at us. He wasn't really looking around the room like I'd seen Wendy. Wendy was so alert on day 1, really. She was so alert, and she locked eyes with us at the very, very beginning. And, you know, they say the distance between the position of breastfeeding and the mother's face is the optimal distance for babies to look into their parents' faces, and he just wasn't doing that. He was enthralled with the sliding glass door in our apartment. And we're like, oh, how cute. He loves lights. And there was a lot of other stuff going on. Check out any of my solo episodes to hear about that stuff. There's a lot going on medically and a lot of therapies and emotionally. And so it kind of took the back burner, but I just remember noting that, like, oh, that's weird. He's not looking at us. We had therapists in our home from as soon as we got home because he automatically qualified for early intervention because of his diagnosis. And I kept telling the therapist, like, he's not looking at me. And they're like, oh, he's still sick, or he's struggling with this and this, and it makes sense, let's wait and see. Let's wait and see. I'm sure it'll be fine. But I knew in my gut, I knew he can't see me. And something's very wrong because I had Wendy to compare him to. And I was like, he's just not looking at us. And so as I brought it up every so often, finally at 5 months old, I said, guys, he's still not looking at me. And they're like, okay, we need to get him checked. And, that was a validating moment to be like, cool, they're listening to me, but also like, oh no, oh no. They agree that something's wrong, and I want to be proven wrong in my doubts and my fears. And I actually stumbled upon this old blog post that I wrote from that time, right after we made the appointment, but before we'd gone in to ophthalmology. And I'm just going to read it. Like, it's a gem because it's from that time. I think a lot of times when I am talking about these really hard things, it is from this perspective of, I remember hurting and I remember it being really terrible, but it's kind of hard to articulate without just saying, oh, it was so hard. It was so hard. It was so hard. I feel like that's all I say when I'm remembering that stuff. So I'm going to read this blog post. It is a little triggering for me to read. I'm not going to lie. It brings me right back there. But that's what these episodes are for, right? To trigger Maddie and make her in a funk as she remembers these really hard things. But it's worth it. It's worth it to share that connection and help you know that you are not alone if you've been feeling anything similar to this. Okay, here is the post. Having a special needs child is so, so special and bone deep exhausting. I don't know if this will be the new normal for me, but I tend to have many, or not so many, mental breakdowns every couple of months. I hope this only lasts the first year or so and that I can get used to it. But how will I ever get used to it? How will I ever get used to having a broken son? His soul is so very perfect. When he smiles, the room lights up. And yet that perfect smile is darkened by that sick feeling in my gut that he's never smiled at me, or his daddy, or his sister. It's the window that has his affections, or the mirror, or the light. But our eyes are never locked in those happy moments. Only a couple of times a week do I ever catch his eye. The moment is fleeting. It's over right as I catch my breath in my throat, and my heart starts to hammer as if I'm in 6th grade again, and my crush happens to look my way. And then the moment passes, and I wonder if it was a mistake, that I just happened to be in his line of sight for those seconds. One of the sweetest things about being a mother is seeing that look of love, those sweet, huge eyes looking at yours, surely looking into your soul. Those eyes that tell you they love you, that all your sleepless nights and fussy days are worth it. Those eyes that say thank you. And yet, it hasn't happened yet. I know he loves me. Surely making eye contact is not synonymous with those feelings of attachment. But even as I tell myself that over and over, I don't quite believe it. Impossible. Does he really love me? Does he even know I exist? My voice amplified in a tinny, distant noise as if into a cheap microphone at an auction. My voice that he hears only a couple of times a day for 10 minutes until they fall out or Wendy starts hitting him, or both. They tell me they can probably fix it. Just another surgery, just another therapy, just one more thing. And stents, and gloves, and hearing aids, and his G-tube, and physical therapy exercises, and preventing Big Sister from beating him up, and an ENT follow-up, and hearing aid fittings, and orthodontics, and neurosurgeon, and every other wonderful specialist that insists that this part of him is priority, number 1. The weight of it all is just too much. My knees buckle under the weight, but I try to be strong. I remind myself that I'm being formed into one of those really BA special needs moms at the park that everyone admires. Surely it's a painful process to be turned into one of them. But then the developmental specialist and hearing specialist confirm what my mommy gut has been voicing all along. His eyes. Something's wrong with his eyes. My knees that were buckling now give out and I'm sprawled on the ground. And the weight is pounding me into a pulp. I'm broken. I'm in pieces. And I see Wendy's sweet face asking me if I'm happy, a frantic sound to her voice. She hates to see me cry. Having a child with a rare disease is possibly the most isolating trial to go through. I'm so alone in this struggle. Who else in the world has bilateral hearing loss, restricted nasal airway, short long bones, sight issues, developmental delays, and all the rest? Even those in his extremely rare diagnosis don't have this exact combination of disabilities. And if they do they have a toddler crying because I'm holding him and not her? Justin might be the one most able to imagine what my days are like. And yet no one really has any idea. People kindly ask how Kimball is, how I am. I mumble something about his progress or how sweet he is, and they give me a knowing look. But oh, they have no idea, no clue what it is like to have this burden. This weight is so isolating. I'm so alone. Even my seemingly all-knowing mother doesn't know. No clue. When I'm at church, I try not to notice the other babies around his age gazing into their mother's faces. They goo, they smile, just as he does, but it's at their mother's faces. Those faces that have no idea how lucky they are. I try not to look. My heart breaks. My throat stings. My son is broken. But it's not my job to fix him. The PT tells me that he needs to stop arching his back or he may never sit up or roll over or walk. I need to roll him. I need to do this. I need to do that. Or he may never walk. The pressure to fix him is immense. Until it hits me. It's not my job to fix him. I will never be able to fix him. How liberating. So my job, to make Kimball Levi Cheney the happiest he can possibly be. To light up that chubby little face into a toothless grin, even if it is at the window. Hopefully someday it'll be looking into my matching blue eyes that splits that grin. And until then, I'll keep trying my very best to be the mother that this sweet, sweet spirit deserves. Well, I think that post sums up how I was feeling at that time really well. And that was before we even had the diagnosis confirmed, but I knew. You can tell in that post, I knew. And I have so much compassion for that version of me that was barely holding on. I don't know how I really was holding on. And I just have so much compassion for where I was and what I was going through. And I just wish I could show myself where I would be, today or even in 10 years or 20 years. But that perspective is something that's so hard to glimpse when you're in the middle of such a thick darkness and so many unknowns. So a few weeks later, we met a pediatric ophthalmologist at the Children's Hospital, known for his genius, but also his terrible bedside manner. When we went in and I was telling him my concerns, he was super condescending. I was like, oh, we'll check, but I'm sure everything's fine. And I was like, okay. And it was kind of this weird, I wanted to be proven right, but I really wanted to be proven wrong because that would mean he was okay. And I was like, I'm okay feeling like an idiot, overreacting mom, if he just tells me he's okay and that he can see. But again, I knew. Lo and behold, he checked him and said, oh, yep, he has something called optic nerve hypoplasia, which is when the optic nerve is short. It's shorter than how it is typically formed. And this is the muscle that connects his eyeball back to his brain and gives his brain the information of what he's seeing. Which makes sense, right? That's consistent. Kimball's short. Even his muscles in his eyes are short. And so we asked him, what does that mean? What does that mean for him? And he said, well, there's a spectrum. He could be on one side of the spectrum where he's blind. He's completely blind. He can't see anything. Or he could be way on the other side of the spectrum where he uses his vision very functionally and really has very few issues with it. It could be anywhere in between there. And although he was not looking at us and it was clear that he couldn't see, hearing it that way, and he was referring to adults with this. And so just picturing him later in life and still not being able to see and being blind was really, really painful. It was really hard. It was heartbreaking on top of everything else. I mean, just the sheer load of it all, there just being so many things. It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable that there was another thing. That kind of is a theme, I feel like it's just another thing, another thing. What next? What else could happen? He's deaf, but he's blind too? So he's deaf blind? Really? He doesn't even have his vision to compensate with we've always heard people who are deaf, don't worry, they're super visual people. That's how they communicate visually. Okay, well, what if they can't see? And, blind people, well, they have super hearing and they can hear super well. They compensate that way. What if they can't really hear? So it's just this really dark corner, it feels like you're just pushed into of like, well, they can't hear and they also can't see. And I think also just thinking of it as like, he doesn't know any different. A lot of people tell me that when they're trying to comfort me. He doesn't know any different. He doesn't know that he's supposed to see or hear or any of these other things. But I know better. I can see. I can hear. So many of the best experiences of my life are from seeing things, from hearing them, seeing a beautiful scene outside, seeing my loved ones' faces, that connection it brings. It's not just blindness. That is a huge diagnosis. As we walked in our fog out to the car, we started realizing the implications too for ASL. We were starting to go down that route and we were just so exasperated. Like, what do we even do? He can't even see us and we've been learning ASL. So I'd heard of tactile sign like Helen Keller did when you sign into their hand, but just it was this new low that we were driven to, an all-time low of despair and overwhelm. And just having all of those feelings hit me at once of not having that connection with Kimball visually when that was all we really have with newborns and babies. So I dropped Justin off at work because he worked in the same city as the children's hospital. And I headed home to our apartment where this angel of a woman in our neighborhood, Eileen, she was there. She's a grandma too. She was really good with Wendy and Wendy loved her. And that was huge that she was willing to babysit Wendy for these appointments, especially ones like these. And I walked in the door and I was crying when I walked in. And she was like, "Oh, how'd it go?" And through my tears, I was able to stammer out, "He's blind. He's blind. We just found out he's blind." And she gave me a hug and looked at me with these big eyes and then, went home. And I had to pull myself together and bring Wendy and Kimball to the pediatrician. Right then, I had to go right then. We had our appointment right after that, which I've learned since then. Oh my gosh, if you're listening to this and you were in the beginning of this or even the middle, never schedule back-to-back appointments. Don't, just one a day. One a day is plenty to deal with. I think that's just a good rule of thumb that we have found. Don't do more than one in the same day. So I grabbed some food, threw Wendy's shoes on, and dragged her out the door to her protest because she wanted to stay home, and buckled Kimball back up in the car and buckled her in the car. We headed off to the pediatrician for Kimball. That day was just such a fog. Just barely holding it together, just completely in survival mode. And I got a text from a friend who I didn't know her that well. Wendy and her son were friends. She texted me and said, "Hey, I'm headed to the store. Is there anything I can get you?" And I was like, "Yes, get me dried mangoes." Because that's like one of my comfort foods. I love dried fruit, but none more than dried mangoes. And she had her own stuff. She had two little kids and the same ages as Wendy and Kimball, and she brought me the dried mangoes. And I told her, we just found out Kimball's blind. And I told her how much that meant to me that she brought that. I was so small, and I saw this outreach as something that could be this little glimmer of light in such a dark day. And I latched onto it and told her to bring me the mangoes. And it was just so good to feel seen and to feel like someone was there to help me, even in that small way. It just meant so much. It's hard to really explain, but it meant so much. And the timing of it was impeccable. So before we went into this appointment, we had a weekend away scheduled for me and Justin. In that blog post where I talked about these meltdowns and breakdowns I was having periodically, like every month, I'd have the meltdown of I just can't do this anymore. And that really was this regular thing for me. And so this one was the first of several that we did. The weekend away where my mom came and took the kids because I was in this state of fight or flight mode. I was cringing from the pain. It was like someone was like hurting me physically and like burning me or something, and I was flinching away and trying to escape. I was trying to escape the pain. I was trying to escape the misery of it all. The complete overwhelm. I felt attacked. I felt attacked by his diagnosis and attacked by all of his medical needs. And I really do believe I was having that fight or flight reaction. I remember calling Justin and saying, "Justin, I might leave. I might just leave. I don't think I can do this anymore." And that was a really scary feeling because, we hear about like these mothers that desert their families, and it sounds so barbaric and like, how could anyone do that? How could anyone leave their family? But I recognized that in myself. I was like, I'm her right now. I want to leave. I love my children and I love my husband, but I want to leave. I want to stop hurting. So this weekend away was a very mild tame version of that. We ran away and we had it planned beforehand, and that was another awesomely timed thing, it turned out. So the next day we had scheduled to go, and so we left. It was like 2 cities away, but it wasn't at home and we didn't have our children to take care of. We just grieved. We were so sad. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. That there was another thing added onto our sweet son. That he couldn't see us and that he may never see us. Now looking back, it's like, yeah, I know that his vision improved and he went on the other side of the spectrum. But at that point, he couldn't see anything but lights. We hadn't exchanged eye contact. He hadn't seen my face. He didn't know what we looked like. And I had no guarantee that would ever happen. In fact, we were assuming that would never happen. And looking back, I'm realizing part of it is because the worst of the worst kept happening to us, save him dying. I know that truly would be the worst of the worst, but it felt like worst case scenarios kept happening and things that were unbelievably hard kept happening. So why not? Why not him be blind forever? That was not out of the realm of a possibility for us. That was a reality that this really could be. And I think the glimmer of hope that maybe it could get better was a painful thing to hold on to because we knew that there was a huge chance that it wouldn't. And how painful would that be if we were sitting there, well, hopefully it'll improve, and holding on to that, which really wasn't guaranteed. It wasn't even that likely. And so it really was a self-protection thing too, to just grieve as if we knew he would be blind his whole life. And that was wonderful to get away, to be able to handle our grief. But it was a really dark time for us and for me. I kept just realizing things during that weekend, kind of processing it, thinking back about his NICU experience and realizing but he couldn't see or hear anything as he was hooked up to tons of machines and needles and IVs and breathing tubes down his throat and feeding tubes down his throat. And he wasn't even able to be held for the first week. Like, I think I grieved also the past of things I didn't realize were happening. I didn't know that he couldn't see and that he was getting zero stimulation from his world, zero sight, zero hearing. And what kind of beginning of a life is that? It's just so unfair. And I wasn't able to protect him from that. In fact, I gave it to him. So, because of that diagnosis, we got a vision therapist from the School for the Blind to add on to our parade of therapists. I won't say her name, but she was not helpful at all. We were used to Angie from the School of the Deaf for his hearing loss. She would come over with like a lesson plan ready to go, and she was just so competent and so capable at teaching us these things to do to help him learn language and to help him improve in all aspects of communication. And we were so helpless and hopeless about his vision. We really knew nothing. You know, there's like hearing aids and ASL and all that. And then for vision loss, it's like Braille. Like that's really all a walking stick or a seeing eye dog. Like still, I don't know very much about the vision loss world. For some reason, it feels very mysterious and I just don't know very much about it. But we had this therapist come over and she would just kind of bring over shiny toys that he liked and just kind of chat. And I was like, this is not adding any value to my life. It's taking up time. We don't have the bandwidth to have useless therapies in our life. So I texted her and said, hey, we don't really need your services anymore. I feel really happy that I had the wherewithal to do that. And that's something I do recommend. If your therapist is not adding anything to your life or your child's life, there's no responsibility to keep them. And if you can, it's awesome to find a replacement that can do a better job for you and your family and be a better fit. So we were able to get placed with Sunday, who is our deaf-blind therapist. She targets both losses. She's the only one in Utah and she travels all over the place. And we love her. We love Sunday. So we've had her and Angie kind of tag teaming his vision and hearing loss. And that's been great. We went to a vision loss parent conference, and that was for everyone receiving services for vision loss in the 0 to 3 range. And we had just gotten this diagnosis. It was pretty new. And while we were there, we were learning all these techniques, and there were other parents there that had brought their children with varying types of blindness. And as we were in this class and they were teaching us these different techniques, I think they said something about them using their hearing for something. And I rose my hand and I said, so what if they also have deafness? And I just remember all the parents like, what? And like turning in their seats to look at who in the heck had a child who also had deafness on top of their blindness. And I felt so other and just so like pitiful. Like, man, even these parents who have these kids that have these, medical issues and, they've got their stuff going on and I look like the worst case scenario to them. And the teacher said, we'll talk to you after the class. And she pulled us aside and told us these ideas. And, even the advice for things like that, it just was so overwhelming. It was great to receive advice, but it also was like really hard because it was just adding another thing onto my little to-do list of things I needed to do to help Kimball. And it felt impossible because of the load I already had. But we did discover when he was 1.5, a deaf-blind conference. That was awesome. So this one was 0 to 21 years old. So this was a very tight-knit group of parents from all over Utah getting together for this yearly conference, and they knew each other super well. And we were seated at a table with a very nice dinner with Carrie Harbath, who I actually had on the podcast way back in season 1, episodes 10 and 11. Go listen to those. She is awesome. And we met a few other parents that are also awesome, that were young like us and had just gotten these diagnoses. And that was really cool. That was super awesome to be with other parents who had the deafness and the blindness, because it wasn't this big shock factor. In fact, Kimball was less medically complex than most of the other kids of these parents that were there. And, that kind of community has been awesome. So, kind of in conclusion, Kimball has steadily improved his vision. At 1 year old, I was looking back through that blog to kind of remember when things started getting better for his vision. And his favorite things were shiny objects and windows and lights. And he would flap his arms with joy. It was like he was trying to fly away. It was super cute. He would just flap them as he saw the shiny things. Like we had this windmill that had this super shiny paper it was made out of. And when we were outside and he'd watch it, he would just flap his little arms and his eyes would go crossed, because he also had strabismus. And it seriously is the cutest thing. It was so cute. And one windy day, I remember I was not feeling good at all. And so I laid out the blanket in our grass, laid Kimball on it. Wendy was playing around us, and I stuck the windmill into the ground and just laid there, and he flapped his little arms and was so enthralled by that for 2 hours. He just sat there just so enthralled with it. And that was it's so sweet. But he also at that time could tell who was who. When Justin got home from work, he was super excited and would flap his little wings again. And so I think at that point he could tell who we were by watching the way we moved and our mannerisms. But there really is no way for us to test his vision even now until he can tell us what he's seeing. And that's hard, because with hearing loss, you can do ABRs where they hook up sensors to their brain and you can tell if their brain is responding to sound. You can do the Booth tests. But with the vision loss, when I ask, well, what does it look like to him? No one really has a good answer for me, because no one really knows. What we're going off of is how functional he is. So is he able to get around and function throughout his day without being very inhibited? And that is where he's come so far now that if you saw him moving around, you would never guess that he had vision loss until he crosses his little eyes once in a while. That's really cute. But, he uses his vision so functionally. And so that has been an outcome that we didn't know would happen. It was not guaranteed. There was no way of knowing that would come. And it's been amazing. It's been so awesome. But it's also been surprisingly painful in a way. It was painful because as he improved and kind of came out of that category of blindness more and more, where now he is deafblind. He has blindness that will always be a part of him. It's not fixable with glasses or surgery. Nothing will fix it. It's just his optic nerve is just short. And it became a little defining for myself, I think, and a little defining of him. I think I put that label on him that he's deafblind. That's Kimball. And so I think him using his vision so functionally and not really acting deafblind has been kind of painful for me. It's a little part of Kimball that I got so used to and I loved and was just such a part of him, and that I was so used to struggling with, that having it gone was a triumph, but it's also been hard. I feel almost this emptiness or almost this disappointment after these boring follow-ups with ophthalmology. Yep, everything looks good. He's doing great. And with Sunday, it's kind of maybe we're wasting your time by still having you here because he's doing so well. It's weird because I have this thrilling happiness, but also this little bit of an ache of this sense of identity that I had taken upon myself and that I had really adjusted to. So that's been really unexpected. And so if you're feeling that, I'm here right with you. There's nothing wrong with feeling that. There's room for all of the emotions. There's room for the debilitating grief for the diagnosis, but there's also room for that confusing grief over improvement. There is room for all of it. Don't forget to answer this month's question of the month about hospital stays on the website. Link in the show notes. There'll be a link in the show notes for the several episodes where I kind of mention Kimball's blindness and other fun stuff like that. Join me next week as I chat with Erica Ryan all about her son Wesley with a rare case of Down syndrome and who recently passed away. She has some beautiful things to share, and I can't wait to share it with you. See you then.